Every anchor that evening described it as a standard panel exchange. The producer in the control room described it as the quietest 4 seconds of television she had ever been responsible for. By midnight, 27 million people had seen the clip. By morning, every major outlet had run the transcript of the one sentence. By the following week, that sentence had been cited in 3 op-eds, 2 podcast episodes, and 1 congressional floor speech, not as a political weapon, but as a case study in the specific kind of precision that makes language function like a scalpel rather than a hammer. Nobody replayed what came before it. The 2 minutes and 11 seconds that preceded the sentence were the scaffolding of everything it accomplished. Without them, the sentence was memorable. With them, it was conclusive. The panel had been booked as a discussion on public education policy. 4 voices, a roundtable format, a moderator told by her producer that morning to expect a clean, substantive exchange. The topic list had been circulated 48 hours in advance. Michelle Obama confirmed. Karoline Leavitt confirmed. 2 additional panelists from education advocacy confirmed. Everyone had the same document. Everyone had read it. Nobody had read the same thing in it. Now, a different room. 18 months earlier, Princeton University's Mudd Library. A researcher pulling microfilm from the archive. Physical microfilm, the kind that requires a reader and a careful hand and an hour of patience for what a digital search would return in 4 seconds. She was looking for one document, Michelle Obama's senior thesis, 243 pages, submitted in 1985. Title, Princeton Educated Blacks and the Black Community. It had been available in that archive since the day it was submitted. It had been read by thousands of people since then. The researcher was not reading it for news. She was reading it for something more specific, the question it was built on, and whether that question had been answered yet. She found what she was looking for on page 11, back to the panel, the studio, the round table configuration with 4 chairs and a low centerpiece that a set designer had placed to create intimacy, and that a camera operator had asked to be moved 2 inches left for clearance. Leavitt arrived first, 8 minutes before taping, which is the arrival time of someone who understands that entering a room before your counterpart is itself a form of positioning. She settled into her chair the way she always settles. Weight forward, elbows close to the table's edge, the spread of a person who takes up exactly the space they have decided to take up and not a fraction more or less. She spread her notepad, placed her pen parallel to it, and looked at the moderator with the flat, ready expression of someone who has arrived fully prepared and is now waiting for the room to catch up. Michelle Obama arrived 4 minutes later. She came through the studio door with the quality of arrival that belongs to people who do not require early positioning, who are present the moment they cross the threshold without needing the preliminary time to establish themselves. She wore something simple. She acknowledged the moderator with a brief, genuine nod. She looked at the other panelists once each. She looked at Leavitt, 1 second, direct, without prolongation, then looked at her chair and sat down. She sat differently from Leavitt, not more carefully, not more deliberately, but differently. The weight settled rather than placed, the quality of a person whose presence fills a chair rather than a person who has filled it by decision. She placed her hands in her lap. She did not open a notepad. She did not arrange the materials. She looked at the table's center and was simply there, the way something very certain is simply there, requiring no announcement. The taping began. The first 14 minutes were exactly what the topic list had promised. Education funding, equity gaps, the specific and documented reality of school closures in underserved communities, the data that both women cited, from different angles, with different emphases, toward different conclusions. Leavitt was precise and fast, her arguments organized in the specific sequence of someone who has prepared them in order and is delivering them in order. She was effective. Her citations were accurate. Her framing was the framing of a press secretary, constructed for maximum clarity and minimum vulnerability, each statement sealed before the next one opened. Obama listened. She spoke when it was her turn. She did not interrupt. She did not redirect. She engaged with the specific claims Leavitt made by extending them rather than refuting them. A conversational technique that is either generosity or patience, depending on what comes after it. At minute 14, Leavitt made the characterization. It was not hostile in its construction. It was the kind of statement that is made by someone who believes in the framing so completely that they do not hear the assumption inside it. She said that the communities most affected by education gaps were the ones that had been best served by the current administration's school choice agenda. and she said that the people who continued to oppose that agenda, despite the evidence, were operating from an ideology rather than a genuine commitment to outcomes. She said it clearly, without hesitation, with the calm of someone stating a thing they consider self-evident. She was looking at the moderator when she said it. She moved her eyes to Obama 2 seconds after the sentence ended. Obama had not moved. Her hands were still in her lap. Her expression had not changed from the expression she had carried through the previous 14 minutes of substantive exchange, but she was looking at Leavitt now with a quality of attention that was different from what it had been for the previous 14 minutes. Not sharper, not warmer, not harder. Something else. The attention of someone who has just confirmed a thing they needed to confirm before they said the thing they came to say. She let 2 full seconds pass. Then she said, "I want to make sure I understand your framing correctly." And she repeated it back. Not mockingly, not with editorial inflection, verbatim. The exact sentence Leavitt had used, in the exact order, with the exact emphasis. She repeated it the way a very precise person repeats something before responding to it, to establish that the response is to what was actually said, not to a mischaracterization of it. Leavitt nodded. She said, "Yes, that's right." Obama said, "Then I'd like to ask you something." She reached to the side of her chair, not under it, not to a bag, but to a folder that had been placed on the floor beside the chair's left leg before taping began, positioned there by an aide who had placed it without fanfare and without the production team's specific knowledge of its contents. She placed it on the table in the center of the 4 chairs. She did not open it. She said, "I wrote my senior thesis at Princeton in 1985 on the relationship between institutional education and community belonging." She said, "I spent 4 years before that and 3 years of graduate school after, and 8 years in the public sector, and 8 years as First Lady, and every year since, working on exactly the question you just described as ideological resistance." She opened the folder. 1 page, a single printed passage. She turned it to face the table, not toward Leavitt specifically, toward the table's center, readable by anyone seated around it. She said, "So when you characterize the opposition to a specific education policy as ideology rather than commitment, I want to ask you a question that I've been asking since 1985, and that the people you're describing have been asking since long before that." She paused, not for effect. The pause of someone making certain of the exact words before they are placed in the record. Then she said, "Whose outcomes are we measuring, and who decided that those outcomes were the right ones to want?" The room went dead silent. Not the between-statement silence of a panel finding its rhythm. The silence of a room in which something has been asked that has no fast answer. Not because the answer doesn't exist, but because the answer requires a kind of honesty that the question's framing had, until this moment, made it possible to avoid. The floor director, standing at the back of the set, had his clipboard in both hands and was not looking at it. The camera operator on the far left had stopped adjusting and was simply holding. A woman in the production booth later said she took her hand off the switching panel because switching felt, in that specific 4 seconds, like an intrusion. Leavitt's jaw set. Her hands came from the table's edge to its surface. Flat, still, the physical grammar of a person who has moved from forward-leaning readiness to a different posture entirely without being aware of it. Her eyes were on Obama. Her breathing was steady. Her expression was composed. But the composure had a different quality from the composure of the previous 14 minutes. It was held now, rather than available, the difference between a face at rest and a face that is resting deliberately. She opened her mouth. She said, "I think." She stopped, not because she had been interrupted, because the sentence in the opening did not have the structure she needed, and she knew it before it was 3 words long. She began again. "The metrics we use." She stopped again. "The same reason." She took 1 breath, visible, the chest rising and settling. She said, "That's a broader philosophical question than what we were discussing." Obama nodded. "Once." She said, "Yes." She said it the way you say yes when you've confirmed something you needed to confirm. She said, "That's the scaffolding the whole discussion has been standing on, and I think it's important that we know it's there." She said the word once, quietly, as a technical designation, the way an engineer names the load-bearing element of a structure that looks finished from the outside. She closed the folder. She placed her hands back in her lap. She looked at the moderator and indicated, with a small inclination of her head, that she had said what she came to say. The panel continued for 17 more minutes. Both women participated. Both were substantive. Both were precise, but the 17 minutes that followed the one sentence had a different quality from the 14 that preceded it, as if the room's coordinate system had been quietly, irrevocably adjusted and everyone present was navigating the new one without acknowledging the shift. The clip that ran everywhere that night was 11 seconds. Obama's question, Leavitt's 2 attempts to begin an answer, the breath, and the one sentence that substituted for the one that didn't come. 11 seconds. Viewed 27 million times before midnight, 39 million by the following evening. Leavitt's team issued a statement the following morning. It described the panel as a productive exchange and characterized Obama's question as a philosophical diversion from the substantive policy discussion. The statement used 4 paragraphs to say what Leavitt had said on the panel in one sentence, that it was broader than the discussion. The statement was posted beside the clip in every thread that shared it, 4 paragraphs beside the one sentence that had produced them. The ratio itself was the story. The White House was asked about it at the afternoon briefing. Leavitt answered from the podium with the efficiency of someone who has prepared a response and is delivering it cleanly. She said the administration stood by its education record. She said the metrics were clear. She did not address the specific question Obama had asked. At 3:06 a.m., a network received an anonymous communication from a former Department of Education policy analyst. No name, matching letterhead, 1 paragraph. It stated that the question Obama had asked on the panel was the same question that had appeared in 17 consecutive internal policy review documents between 2017 and 2021, each time marked as a foundational issue requiring resolution before outcome metrics could be meaningfully evaluated, and each time left unresolved because the resolution required a prior agreement on values that the policy framework had not achieved. The paragraph ended with one line. The question is not philosophical. It is the load-bearing question. Everything else is scaffolding. The network verified the letterhead against public federal records. No way to dismiss it quickly. No counterstatement arrived before morning. The thesis from 1985 ran everywhere the following day. People who had never read a Princeton senior thesis were reading it, or reading the 11 pages that had been excerpted and posted by 14 separate accounts. They were reading the question on page 11. They were reading it beside the clip of Obama asking, 40 years later, a version of the same question in a television studio, with the same precision and the same patience and the same willingness to wait for an answer that a woman who had been asking it since 1985 carries. Leavitt had said, the opposition is ideological rather than committed to outcomes. Obama had said, whose outcomes, and who decided they were the right ones to want. The scaffolding of the first statement, once the second one named it, was visible from every angle. It had always been there. The question had always been available. It had simply waited for the right room, the right moment, and the specific patience of a woman who had been holding it in one form or another since before Karoline Leavitt was born. The people who subscribe to this channel don't come for drama. They come for the moments nobody else is willing to show, the ones where a single question, asked without elevation, in the register of someone who has been waiting 40 years to ask it in exactly the right room, reveals the scaffolding that the whole argument was built on. Join them, subscribe, turn on notifications. The next truth is already on the table.